Welcome, everyone. My name is Stephanie Ivick. I'm the Content Marketing Manager here at eLearning Brothers. We have a really great webinar for you today on JavaScript and CSS in Lectora. But first, I'll go over a few housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded. We'll send a copy of it out via email to everyone tomorrow, so you can keep an eye on your inboxes for that. Closed captions are enabled, but you need to turn them on for yourself. There's a live transcript button in your Zoom toolbar at the bottom. You can use that to click on the closed captions if you want those. If you have any questions during the webinar, feel free to put those in the Q&A panel. We'll get to as many as we can during the webinar, and if we can't get to yours, we'll follow up offline afterwards. We also have some live chats. You can say hello to the other attendees and share your feedback there as well. Without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Bill Milstid. He's our senior developer here at eLearning Brothers, and he is going to wow you with Lectora.
Hey, everybody. Hey. All right, thanks for joining us today. Like Stephanie was saying, today we are going to be taking a look at some different stuff in Lectora today. We're going to look at how to make some courses that are a little beyond what's typically offered in an out-of-the-box, rapid authoring tool, right? And specifically, we're going to be looking at it in terms of some very light scripting. This is a beginner's level webinar. You may find some pretty good use in it, even if you're, intermediate or advanced, but really this is kind of the beginning stages of looking at scripting in Lectora. Now, what are we trying to accomplish, right? Because I've got this thing up on screen that says you don't need any scripting knowledge to make beautiful, stunning courses in Lectora. And that's true. We've got tons of examples of work from Lectora that's just absolutely spectacular out of the box. So why would we need to incorporate some sort of scripting, JavaScript, CSS, like we're talking about today? Well, we're really looking at it from kind of two main perspectives today. The first one is interacting with data. That's the most common use case that we get for JavaScript and Lectora, doing things with data a little outside the tool, bringing them back in, things like that. But the second reason why we want to look at using JavaScript and CSS or what we're talking about today is kind of the front end bit of things. There are just certain things you may find yourself wanting to do in a custom course that any rapid authoring tool is going to be a little limited on. So I've got an example on screen right now, right? This is a Lectora desktop course that we built as kind of a proof of concept for playing with these type of things in Lectora. Now, I'd say 98% of this course is built using just off-the-shelf stuff in Lectora, general actions, the built-in stuff that you're used to. But there are some features in it that required a little bit of JavaScript, specifically Jquery and CSS. So you'll see in the background, right, we've got these rotating, planets that are kind of going around on the screen. If I kind of dip into this like Uranus planet here, you'll notice that I've got this rotate to reveal thing going on. If my mouse can catch up with timing. That kind of stuff, right? That kind of high-end custom front-end stuff is a good reason to step outside of the box in Lectora. But again, remember, you really don't have to, okay? If you did want to do stuff like we're gonna, like I just showed there, and like we're gonna be talking about today, it really is. It's actually pretty simple to get to, and there's not a lot that you need to know to do it. You need to know a little bit about JavaScript, Jquery. We're also going to talk about, and a little bit about CSS. Okay, I'm going to show you today practically how to actually start to use some of this stuff, but we're not going to spend a lot of time defining this, even though this is a bit of a beginner's course. And it's for a couple of reasons. One, time. We're going to run through it real quick. And two, just a lot of this stuff, better descriptions than I'm going to be able to give you exist out there on the web. W3 Schools is an excellent place to start, but there's just tons of resources to learn in very technical terms, the stuff that we're talking about. Today, we're going to look at this in very generic language, very kind of basic idea stuff. If you already have an understanding of JavaScript, cool, you keep going with that. If you're totally fresh to it, we're going to try to phrase it in a way that makes it a little easier to comprehend and kind of pick up on. It is very simple stuff. JavaScript, left-hand side of the screen, I've got just like a real easy definition there. It's a scripting language. You interact with it on a daily basis, whether or not you know it or not. It's present on pretty much every modern web page. And it's really what allows interacting with that web page instead of having a static web page. So you can interact with data in the page, content on the page, objects, the page itself. There's all kinds of ways that you can interact with a given web page or a course, since a course is just a series of web pages, with JavaScript. Again, one main way is manipulating data. In that case, you're probably just going to be using vanilla JavaScript. Another way you're going to be using, like I just showed, is to manipulate the front end of a course to do some visual stuff. And in that case, the way we're going to look at it today, you're going to be using Jquery, which is a derivative of JavaScript, and CSS. CSS is important for a couple of reasons. One, it's the way that we define the visual design of elements on a page, right? So this text is red, this text is blue, links behave this way, this object is this size, right? But it's also important because CSS uses classes and IDs to define those attributes. So it has a way to reference the objects on the page that we may actually want to use with JavaScript or with Jquery. So even if we're not doing explicitly, CSS altering stuff, CSS is good to have as a frame of reference for this, or good to keep in mind with when thinking about this stuff, because you can use it very quickly and easily to reference objects on the page. Okay, so moving on, kind of understand why we might use it, data and visual stuff. Let's actually start showing you how to do it very simply in Lectora. First thing we're going to look at is actually doing something with data, right? The first use case. The most common, that is the most common use of JavaScript in Lectora, but the most common use of that that we see it on a daily basis is using JavaScript to go into Lectora, grab a variable value, or to set a variable value inside of Lectora from outside of the course using JavaScript, right? On this page, we're going to walk through that. I'm going to do it first in kind of the pseudocode abstract way using this top stuff, and then I'm going to show you some other stuff down below and then a practical example of it. But we're going to look at those two examples. So first off, I'm kind of assuming that you know how to run run JavaScript in Lectora. If you don't, I'll hop in real fast. It's a very, very, very simple thing. We just have actions in Lectora for beginning Lectora developers that you assign to an object. So on click, on show, on whatever, run JavaScript. Got it up on screen right there. You can see this object right here called getValue. When I click it, I'm going to run some JavaScript. Okay. If you wanted to run JavaScript specifically to get values or to set values, this is how you do it. On the left-hand side of the screen, I've got some pseudocode right there. And on the right-hand side of the screen, I've got this text block. I'm going to explain those and we're going to walk through them real quick. Got a get variable value and a set variable value text block. And beneath each one of those is a plain text description of how you would actually do this in Lectora. It's a single line. All you actually would need to do is run a JavaScript action like I just briefly showed on the screen there. And inside the JavaScript portion of it, you type that one line, var Lectora variable name dot get value to get the value, or var Lectora variable name dot set, and then whatever value you want it to be in the parentheses. Okay, so that's the kind of plain text idea of it. Run an action, put that line of code in it, you're good. A little more practically, right? I'm actually going to do that on screen here with these examples that I have up. The right-hand side, you see key code variable. That's just letting you know what that actually is on the right-hand side is I've got a Lectora variable named key code, and the current value of it is tester value. Okay, that's just sitting there as a reference. When I click, I've actually also added an action to each of these text boxes to run specifically what they describe, right? The top one's going to run a variable value, and the bottom one's going to set it. If I click this top text box, I've got a little JavaScript alert in there. It says alert, and then exactly this value, var key code, because that's the name of my Lectora variable, dot get value. And when I press it, you're going to see it pops up this little window here. It says tester value. That's the actual variable value coming out of Lectora Live that matches what my kind of value I've got here on screen for reference. Okay, no problem. And if I click set, I'm actually going to change that value from tester value to set value with initial caps. So if you see I press, my variable changes in the Lectora course, And then if I wanted to go back and confirm it, press my get value, you'll see when I run a JavaScript action to get that value, it tells me what my new value is. Now, if I look at that in Lectora, remarkably simple stuff, like I was saying, you'll see I've just got a single line on my get value object. And when I open it up, it says alert, which is just the JavaScript way to send that message that I should. And then the important part, var keycode.getValue. That's the JavaScript function that's going to bring in the value of my variable. I wrapped it in an alert, so it's going to alert it. Same thing here. If I go to set my variable value, I look at what my action is, and I've got a var keycode.set, and then in parentheses, in quotes, I've got set value. That's the new value I want my variable to be set at. Okay. So abstractly, right? We can use JavaScript to go in and get variable values and set variable values. So what? We're going to walk through another quick little example on screen, and then I'm going to show you how this actually directly applied to a project, okay? The get and set variable value thing, in concept, it's really simple, but you can use it to do a lot of really complicated things. This example I'm about to show you, okay, I'm actually going to insert a new text string into this text input field that I've got on screen, and I'm going to press submit. And when I do, you're going to see that variable pop up on screen, but you're also going to see some stuff below it that pops up on screen. Okay, so new on, why not? Get random letters. I'm going to press submit. You'll notice what I entered into that text entry field over to the left now appears to the right in a whole word here, new on, where. But below it, I've got these individual letters of that code that I just entered. What I've done here is I've put an action on my submit button to basically go up, retrieve the Lectora variable value from my text entry field here, right? So get value, same as here. Then do some stuff in JavaScript with it, specifically to split it into its individual parts, and then to dump those into individual Lectora variables that I've got positioned on the page. So right here, right, this is my build. When I press submit, I'm going to go up here and run an action that just sets whatever my entry 409 value is to a new variable, because that's how I chose to do it, and then splits that into a string, and then defines pre-existing Lectora variables as those individual letters from my main entry field. That's kind of an odd use case, right? It's a pretty complicated use case. Where that actually came in was, if you've seen this before, it's out there on the library. We built this haunted escape room game back in October for Halloween. Basically, it's a one big board. The user goes in, they put their name in, they get some instructions about, hey, you're in this room, it's haunted, you need to escape in a set amount of time. And you do that by answering questions, walking around, clicking hotspots, answering questions as they pop up. And when they pop up, what you end up seeing, if you get a question correct, is you get this little piece of a 5-digit code. It appears for every correct answer. And once you get each piece of that code, you're then able to click on the main exit door and escape the room by entering the secret key code in, right? But you've got to earn that code. We actually use the method that I just showed you with creating a single text entry field and then splitting those individual letters up into an array and popping them into Lectora variables to make this particular template just a little more editable for users, right? So a developer user can come in here and can, instead of having to set 5 separate variables for their unique custom code, if they want to modify this course, they can just go in and set it one time here in this side, off-screen text entry field before they publish, hit publish. And when they do, all those values are going to be stripped out, dumped into the var field there. And when the user, continues playing the game, it's all set. So it's one touch point instead of 5. Still, a fairly particular use case, but hopefully if you squint at it, you can see how that's applicable, because we use text entry fields an awful lot in e-learning, right? One, for instance, way that you might be able to use this, let's say you have like a long form text entry question and you want to be able to go through and scan for specific words or pull out specific sections of that user's entry. You could do that by reaching out, grabbing what that variable is, doing some extra stuff with it in JavaScript that's admittedly a little beyond what we're trying to get to today. And then, either committing some of that data back to Lectora or performing an action based on what you find from that kind of scan and split, right? So there's a lot of different ways that you can use something as simple as, hey, go get and set a value in Lectora to make something incredibly complicated happen. It's very simple JavaScript stuff, but using that kind of basic entry gets you into more complicated development, at least an inroad. Okay. We're not going to focus too much more on the data. There's a ton of stuff, obviously, you can do with data, right? Like you pull in your values, perform some math on it. There's actually some built-in Lectora functions for doing that in JavaScript. You can do whatever you want, really, right? You can adapt a course based on what you're doing here, either in the tool or pull it out into JavaScript and do it. But most of what I use and most of what we get questions about using JavaScript for is actually the second application that I talked about, the kind of front-end stuff, the stuff I showed at the beginning of the course. And we're going to transition to that now, right? So because in addition to manipulating data in Lectora, you can also, like I've said before, reference and manipulate objects on the stage. This is going to take a little bit of linking a few things together. So stick with me for a few minutes and hopefully this will start to make sense. If you're going to manipulate an object on the page, right, you got to know which object to manipulate. There's a bunch of ways that you can do that. One, you can go in and you can pull that data out of the course itself and looking at the ID fields in Lectora. I'll show you in a second. Or you can automate some of that, and that actually matters because when we're getting into doing more custom development, being able to kind of reuse code snippets is pretty important to save time. Lectora includes these things called object replacement called replacement tokens to make certain little functions in JavaScript easy. One of those that's very important that we're going to look at right now, and it's going to link to the next couple pages that we're in, is this %HTML name percent thing that we include. Basically, the easiest way to explain this is if you were to run a JavaScript action on an object and include that HTML name tag, that token that I've got up on screen, what it will do is it's automatically going to reach out back to Lectora, find the HTML name that's given to that object programmatically from Lectora and replace your token with that unique object reference. Okay. I've got an alert on this block here, this HTML name block. When I click it, what it's going to do is it's going to say alert HTML name. So it's going to tell me what the unique object identifier of this particular object is. So in my alert, you can see it says text 1459. Now, what that actually is, okay, if I go in here to my page and I select my object that I just clicked, the one that has the HTML name tag on it, as we can see, if I click the action here, you can see I've got alert HTML name, just like I was saying. If we click that object and we go over to this text flyout, you'll see this HTML name form and then text 1459, which matches the HTML name reference that I've got here. And it also references, if you inspect this element, the div ID, the object ID, the unique identifier in the build for the course. Okay. So we have this little JavaScript token thing, HTML name in Lectora that you can use very rapidly to get the unique instance, the unique object ID, the unique identifier of any object in Lectora. So what? Well, once you have that object ID, that's when you can start doing more stuff, okay? Or yeah, that's the easiest way to put it. Now you could use that object ID to, run some built-in Lectora functions like hide or show or setting things to disable. But that unique ID, or really any object ID, any selector, any sort of an identifier in a published course, you can also use to do this front-end stuff that we're talking about. Okay. Jquery, which I mentioned at the top of this, is kind of a subset of JavaScript. It's a library to help you simplify JavaScript development stuff. It is specifically for acting on objects on the page, specifically for doing front-end stuff. Okay. And the way it works, you'll start to see this make sense hopefully here in a second, is it has this unique little kind of a syntax to it. It's got a little jQuery identifier, this $sign, or if you're inside of Lectora, triv $sign. And what that is it tells you, hey, I'm going to do a JavaScript statement that is specific. It's a jQuery statement that I'm running here, right? So in my JavaScript block, I got this triv $sign that tells the web page, Lectora, whatever, however you want to think about it, use jQuery for this. Can't run jQuery stuff without it, so you put that in there. But after that identifier, triv $sign, you get this selector thing. What a selector in jQuery is it's a reference to an object on the page. Okay, so think back to that HTML name where we could use JavaScript tokens to grab a unique reference to an object on the page. Well, that's important when you start moving into jQuery because that may be one of the references that you use in constructing a jQuery statement. Triv $sign, selector or unique reference to an object on the page, and then .action, right? So that's it in pseudocode. Triv $sign, selector .action. That's actually how all jQuery statements get written, very plain and simple. And I have two kind of, enhanced pseudocode examples directly below that. A little more realistic would be triv object, whatever the object reference is, .hide, or triv object .show. Those work exactly the way you'd expect. You run hide on something, it's going to hide it. You run show on something, it's going to show it. What that actual object that gets placed in there is, though, okay, can depend. One, well, before I get into that, it can be one of two different types of things. No matter what, you've got to have a selector in your JavaScript statement, right, or your JavaScript function, or jQuery function. That can be either an ID or a class. Now, both of these are selectors taken technically from CSS. So if you have any familiarity with CSS, this should be a kind of a, you get it, move right on through it. If you're brand new, basically, we've got two different ways that we identify objects on a page. We've got IDs, which are unique. Those are, indicated with a pound sign or a hashtag, depending on, I guess, what generation you're from. And then we have classes, which are reusable ways to define the style of an object on a page, okay? You can use both of these in jQuery to define your selector. So if we think back to triv $sign selector.action, what you're going to do is actually open up a statement that says triv $sign and then put in the name of whatever the specific selector you're looking for is. This could be whatever the value that came out of HTML name is, in which case that is an ID to an object. So it's unique, specific to the individual object on the page. Or it could be a CSS class that you put in for that selector. It's important to understand the distinction between the two is that IDs are unique and classes are reusable, because if you select an ID to perform an action in jQuery, only that unique object is going to be acted upon. In this case, I've got a rotate function added to it. But if you choose to run a jQuery statement on a CSS class, everything that is classed as the selector that you choose to use is going to get affected. Like the action is going to be performed on that. Okay, so we've got this idea. We've got the jQuery stuff. It's used to manipulate objects on the front end of the page. You have to open it up with triv $sign, and then you add a selector. That selector is the ID to an object or a class, right? Well, how do you actually assign those? Okay, we're going to look at it in tool now. So one, you can, to get IDs, if you want to work on individual IDs on the page, you want to perform an action on just a unique object, you can go in and you can manually actually grab that ID from the course, right? So if you were to go up here, again, select your object and press the fly out, you're going to get the HTML name here. If you do that with an image, right, in here, you're going to get the image name for the HTML name there. You can also assign classes to an object. So for instance, on this example where I had certain things going on, you'll notice the top object that rotated has no class assigned to it. That's because I was working on just the ID to adjust things on the page. And we're going to talk about how I did that in a second more too. But if you notice all my other objects, right, the second click that I made where everything rotated, that's because all of those objects have under the appearance flyout, I've added a rotate class to them, okay? That lets me know that these objects share the same style. So when I go in and I were to, let's say, click on one of those objects and run an action script or run a JavaScript action that says triv $, so I'm using jQuery, dot rotate. My selector then is any class that's named rotate, any object with a class name of rotate. My action is then CSS, transform, rotate, whatever. Okay. Anything that has that class of rotate is going to get the action that I've assigned from jQuery. Hopefully I'm not super confusing with that. But basically there's two ways to identify, one unique, one shared. That's important to understand. Okay, so now we're going to just briefly talk about actions. Actions in jQuery is the bulk of it, right? Like I go in and I open up jQuery and I make a statement. That's no problem. I go in and I identify an object. We can get that. You can get all that data either out of your Lectora flyouts or you can assign it, right? What do you actually do with jQuery once you've begun constructing a statement and you've identified that which object you're going to work on? That can vary quite a lot. There is an awful lot of predefined stuff out there that you can do with jQuery. You can move objects across the page. You can change their dimensions, change, fill. I mean, we do all kinds of stuff. We're going to look very lightly today at specifically applying CSS because that's a built-in function in jQuery. Right? It's a built-in kind of predefined set of tools to help you apply some style in jQuery. Basically, the way it works is quite simple. Okay, you open up jQuery, you define your selector either as a unique ID or as a class, and then as your action, it's very simple. You just put in CSS, open parentheses, and whatever you want that CSS to actually be inside that parentheses, close parentheses, close semicolon. Okay, real simple in theory. And real simple in practice too, but simpler in theory. I've got a couple examples over the right-hand side of the page here that show you kind of how that could work practically, right? So the second one here, right, the top one is obviously pseudocode, triv, object, whatever my selector is, CSS, and then apply CSS style. Practical example of that below is one I actually just showed on the page here previously, where I was rotating multiple objects. Go out, find anything with the class name of rotate, and then apply CSS to it to transform that object. In what way? Rotate it 45 degrees. Okay. Similarly, if I only wanted to act on just an individual unique object ID, take the exact same action, right? CSS transform, rotate 45 degrees. And I just changed the selector that's applied to it. That selector can be derived either manually or you could use HTML name to pull that in. Any styling that you want to do within relative reason is possible doing this. Okay. To the point that back to the example I was showing you before, right? With my space exploration bit here. Every single thing that's going on this back page where I've got rotating, images, we've got the swirling around everything. All that is what I was just showing you. It's triv $, a CSS selector for individual object IDs, CSS, and then a transform to rotate that object around the page. So with one line of script, as long as I'm able to go in and identify where my objects are, figure out, which ones I want to act on and put that into my code, I can quickly and easily move, change, grow, rotate an object on the page, and then reassign that action to other objects on the page without having to edit or change that action as long as I've set it up properly. Okay. I kind of barreled through a lot of that. That's really the bulk of what we're going to cover today. It really was like a very broad introduction to kind of getting started, getting your feet wet with using JavaScript. Why you can use, or how you can use it in two main ways: variable editing and beginning to start to tap playing with some of this front end stuff. There are more examples out there than I could possibly ever repeat about for this type of thing that you can actually emulate and play with in Lectora. But if you're so inclined to pick apart somebody else's file in Lectora, as I mentioned at the top of this, we actually have this course out there on the library that you can download, pull apart, and see how this kind of thing was done practically in a hands-on fashion. So you, instead of listening to me in a 30-minute webinar, try to run through it. But understand that every single thing that we covered today is what actually powers this. It's all variations on very, very simple single lines of code that can cause something as kind of complex as what we've got going on in this example to work. Okay. With that, I guess, because I did run through it a little quicker than I had intended, I just kind of kept steamrolling, didn't stop for questions. I'm going to go ahead and stop and see if anybody has any questions about what we've covered so far, or if anybody has any questions about just kind of more broadly styling, JavaScript, that kind of thing that we're discussing today.
We do have a couple questions, Bill. For jQuery, does using jQuery require page headers to contain a string that pings a jQuery website?
So I actually was planning on going a little bit more into that originally, but the short answer is you could, but you don't have to. So in Lectora, right, if you were to go in and run just a, if you were to go in and just run a standard jQuery statement inside of Lectora, it's not going to work unless you do that, unless you add something into your header tag, right? So just the $ selector. It means you're going to have to do what you're saying, ping back to a jQuery. But if you change that $, right, to a triv $, we actually allow you to piggyback off of the jQuery that's kind of exported at publish. So you don't have to include anything in header scripting. You can just pick it up and run. And this also works in preview mode in both LO and LD.
Awesome. Is there a list of jQuery or JavaScript commands that are specific to Lectora that developers could reference?
Yeah, we have them out there. I need to look and see if we have a consolidated place for it. There's definitely a couple references. So maybe I can get that over to you, Stephanie, and we can figure out how to get it to people.
Yeah, we can share those out. Let's see, is there any documentation on which built-in Lectora functions are available, such as action hide, action show, all of those?
Yeah, so we'll have to kind of run those last two together, Okay. But yes, we got some documentation for it.
I mean, there's a lot of articles in the knowledge base on Lectora, and if there isn't one that has this all in one place, we can work on putting that together. Can you assign multiple CSS classes to an object in Lectora? Is it as easy as simply adding everything you want with spaces?
Pretty much. So if I go back to this main page here, right, in this example, you see it's just a big orange page with a white text block on it when I'm looking at it. But if I actually go in and preview that in my browser, you're going to see there's a lot of different stuff going on, right? We've got this animating thing going on in the background. Well, what that is actually going on there is I've got some CSS, right, for a couple different background elements assigned. I've got this background 2, and background 3. And background 2 and background 3 play off of background 1. They build off of each other, okay? It's just defining some timing differences between the two. So in my main page here, you see I've got a BG, BG2, and a BG3. BG, if I check the classes on that, just has BG class assigned to it. And if I go to BG2, you'll see I've got BG space BG2. So you can definitely assign multiple classes. It's just a matter of putting in your class name, space, new class name, space, new class name, right? And then anything that you have defined in CSS, that'll automatically apply to that object, or you can use it, like I was saying before, as a selector to do other things on the fly.
Awesome. And is the CSS a separate file?
So in Lectora, there's a bunch of ways that you can do it. What I actually have up here, okay, in my course, I just went in and go to Insert, and you want to put in an HTML extension, and then set that to You could either set it to cascading style sheets, right? Why did I set it to meta tags? And then you just press edit. And then in there, you can new class name, and then you open up, whatever you need to do. And you put all your content in there, hit OK, and it saves automatically as an HTML extension at the top of your course. Now, here's one tricky thing about that. That's kind of fun. Okay, if you're familiar with the way inheritance works in Lectora, not only could you disable that style sheet on different pages if you wanted, but you could put in style sheets that are specific to individual pages or global to the entire document. You don't have to have an external document outside of what you're publishing or writing. It's all inside the course file for you.
Awesome. And then can you assign your own custom ID to a Lectora object?
Yeah, so that's not so much editable, really, right? Like you go in and you've got this HTML name is kind of fixed in there. I would be curious to see the use case on that one and see how you were planning to use it, to figure out what the best way to make that work for you is. But if you use the HTML name reference, right, you get a quick reference to whatever the programmatic object ID is, and that'll carry over for anything you copy and paste that script onto, for instance. So it's particularly useful, right? Like you can get that title you can get that object ID without actually setting it, changing it, or looking at it.
All right. Well, Michael, if you want more information about that, give us a little bit more context. And then, all right, one more question before we let you move on. Have you ever thought of doing a click outside to close functionality, for example, to hide a menu or table of contents by clicking outside of the menu when it's displayed?
Yeah. Well, was the question, have I thought about it? Or
yeah.
No, I've honestly, I don't think I have thought about it. That's a great idea, though.
Okay. All right. We're going one more question, and then we really will let you move on. Can you use CSS to set the course to use 100% of the viewable area of the screen?
You can play. Yeah. There's definitely stuff that you can do to manipulate the page wrapper. Be careful with that kind of thing. I don't know that I would necessarily do that. What I would probably try to rely on using publish options as much as possible there, right? So just setting it to scale to 100% width on publish, that kind of thing.
Okay. All right. Well, I will let you continue, and everyone keep putting the questions in, and we'll come back to them at the end.
This was a short one today. We ran through the content pretty quick. So if we don't have any more questions, we can give everybody 20 minutes of the time back, or we can give a few minutes to see if anybody has any.
We are getting a couple comments in. So about the custom IDs, a potential use case, you have, say, 25 items on the page. You can simply have it as item 1, item 2, item 3, and then be able to use a for-do loop to loop through everything as required. Mm-hmm. They're saying they use that a lot in their Flash days. So,
Yeah.
Good old days.
Squinting at it, and I know it's been a minute. It's kind of squinting at it, and I don't know. It's good old days. I don't know if this is going to be exactly in the direction that you're aiming for, but you could certainly run rather than set them manually. You could certainly run pop some on show actions that set those HTML names to variables, store those, and then use those to do whatever you needed. That's certainly a possibility, but I may be misunderstanding how you want to accomplish what you're going for.
All right. Yeah. We have one question that might be a stumper for you. This is referencing back Lectora 11. So that was before eLearning Brothers acquired Trivanus. So we can't be upset with Bill if he doesn't know the answer to this question. But Robert says, I once saw a list of hidden Lectora variables. Are there still hidden Lectora variables? And is there a complete list of all of them?
I don't know that I would necessarily call say that we have hidden variables, because we actually Lectora is really good, especially compared to some other authoring tools, about really exposing just about everything for variables, right? Like we give you access to pretty much all of it. So unless there was something back in the day that wouldn't be included, and to be honest, back then I wasn't super involved in Lectora, right? So I don't know. But unless there was something that has changed between then, I don't know that we have any hidden variables sitting out there. We do have reserved variables, if that's maybe what you're referring to. Could be wrong, but perhaps it is. And those are exposed in the variable manager. If you check the reserve pane, they're all right there for you, and you can use them and reference them however you want. If you're talking about something else, I apologize.
All right, well, hopefully that helps. And then one last question. If you were to use the publish option to set the content to the width of the screen, how would you keep text boxes and other objects from scaling up?
Yeah, I mean, the publish option, it is kind of a, yeah, maybe we should talk maybe send an email as an aside, and we can kind of try to figure out how to do what you're looking to do there easily and quickly. But I don't know that I'm gonna get a good answer out for today.
Okay, so possibly, Jose, if you want to send us an email, we can work through that a little bit more and make sure we're giving you the best advice and not making things look wonky. All right, it looks like those are all the questions we have so right now. Thank you so much, Bill. Oh, Jose, you can email me and I'll forward it on to Bill. My email is in the webinar reminder emails that you get from Zoom. It's just sivic@elearningbrothers.com, and I'll connect you guys. So thank you, Bill, for sharing all of this. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We love talking about all the cool things that you can do in Lectora, and we appreciate all the interaction from all of you. If you don't have Lectora yet, we have a 30-day free trial. You can get that on our website, elearningbrothers.com. And then be sure to connect with us in the Rockstars community on LinkedIn for more tips and to hear about all the next webinars. And have a great Tuesday, everybody.